Welcome back to the Your Project Shepherd Construction Podcast, where we teach that every successful project has 4 key components demonstrated by the simple child's drawing of a house. The foundation is proper planning, the left wall is your team, the right wall is communication, and the roof protecting it all is proper execution. Have all 4 of those components in place, and your project is going to be solid. Our topic today, in my opinion, is one of the most important things that you can do to protect yourself and your project. And that is third-party inspections. And joining me today to talk about third-party inspections are my friends Reece Scott with BEC Engineers and Rhondalyn and Reece with Exterior Inspections. Thanks, guys, for coming on.
Good morning. Thank you.
Good morning.
I am super excited to have you guys on today. You guys are on a lot of our projects with us. And like I said, having a third set of eyes, a fourth set of eyes, a fifth set of eyes on every project is something that we've talked about on this show quite a lot. Just the importance of verification, the trust but verify mentality that we should all have when we're executing any construction project, whether it's home, commercial, whatever. And you guys provide some essential services. So why don't you guys take just a moment and tell us about your company, kind of what you do and what services that you offer as it relates to third-party inspections. Why don't you go ahead, Rhondalyn?
Well, so I'm Rhondalyn and Reece. My company is Exterior Inspections. We've been around since 1997 doing construction consulting. Our primary business is building envelope inspection. We started out in the resale market. So we started out on the back end of projects finding issues, right? And I quickly learned that I'd much rather be on the front end of a project and try to troubleshoot and avoid issues versus trying to find them on the back end and fix them later. So we do inspections from prior to construction start all the way through to the back end to make sure that the house is performing.
Awesome. Reece?
Great. Good morning. I'm with BEC Engineers and Consultants. We're a full service civil and structural engineering firm. We primarily look into residential construction and the greater Houston market. And we do everything from the design for the structural foundation framing. So we're on the tail end or on the upfront end with the architects and the designers. And we also have civil engineers that will do the drainage, swales, site preparation, floodplain control, management of detention, everything. And then we have a full department that's full service on the inspections during the construction. And so we have a team that goes out, looks at every stage of the construction as we're called in, just to make sure that there's that third set of eyes, that sort of level of insurance and assurance that the home is getting built in accordance with the design intent of the structural engineering. And as Carl Broken mentioned in one of the early episodes, it's sort of that insurance that helps you make sure that you've got the product that is designed. A lot of times things are all human, things can get missed. We're not affiliated with the city by any stretch of the imagination. And a lot of people, say, hey, I had your inspector out, and it turned out it was a city inspector. It wasn't one of our inspectors. We are a third-party inspector. And that's a big message that I'd like to get across, is that we are not affiliated with the city. The city does require structural engineering letters and inspections to be done throughout certain phases of the home. Not all phases, unfortunately, but so some people like to scrape by with a minimum. But we always recommend that, our guys are familiar with our plans, know what the intent is, and they know just, how to make sure that everything is getting constructed in accordance with that design intent, to make sure there's no issues that are covered up and sort of hidden and might come out in the wash later on when the project's done and it's too late. So,
and I've said this before, and I'm not trying to pick on the city inspectors, because those guys are definitely overworked and underpaid. They're government employees. But, the city inspectors have typically certain things they look for. I mean, they're code inspectors. They're supposed to be looking for building code. But because of their workload, how many houses they have to look at every day, and kind of the broad knowledge that they have to have of kind of everything, they're not able to catch everything. They're not looking for everything. They're not necessarily looking for the same things that you guys are looking for, right?
Correct.
You guys are more, so they're generalists, and you guys are more specialists. So talk about the things that specifically you look for when you go to a site to do inspections, Rhondalyn?
So I would like to start by saying, that is in and of itself, the city inspections and the fact that they have a really high caseload is in and of itself a reason to have a third party, because they are looking for code, which is minimum standard for building, number one. And number two, we're all human. So the more sets of eyes on a project that you can get, the better off you're going to be, the more likely you're going to catch something that needs to be corrected. And then secondarily, we're there to ensure that things like manufacturer's installation instructions are followed, as it pertains to, for me, weather barriers, flashings, that sort of thing. And also to ensure that maybe some best practices are implemented in a project, based on just experience in the field of seeing things that have previously failed. So, that's, I think, more eyes you can put on a project, the better off you are. And then again, implementing some best practices so that you don't have problems later.
Yeah, and so specifically, you guys, you mentioned like the weather barrier, the WRB, but you do a ton of stucco work. That's one of those things. If the city inspectors, they'll come out and they'll check that the lath is in place. They might check for a weep screed if you're lucky, but again, that's not something those guys are trained on, all the stucco details that need to be in place. That's not a great product to use in the Houston market anyway. It gets used a lot because of cost. But there's some knowledge that has to be there to achieve a good stucco installation, and that's one of the things that you guys look at, right?
Yeah, so we specialize in Portland cement plaster or stucco. That's the industry that I came into the inspection industry from. So, I'm going to have to respectfully disagree. I
Okay.
think stucco is a wonderful product properly installed. And I am going to say this, is that I haven't been to very many projects where it was actually the stucco that was the point of origin or the basis of the problem, right? So we look at weather barriers and flashing and the building envelope before it ever gets covered. Because I always tell people that if your building envelope is not intact and watertight prior to covering it, regardless of what you're putting on it, siding, brick, metal panels, stucco, it's not going to be watertight after you cover it. And then, we see it through to the end to make sure that it's waterproofed as well. So when we come in and do a final inspection, we're looking at all of those things that could cause that exterior cladding to either prematurely wear or fail in some way.
Do you guys also review design details for that wall assembly? So if you're involved, or if the architect or the builder talks to you before the project starts, will you guys review that wall section to make sure that that's something that you approve of?
Absolutely. So we'll do a plan review and detail review and give recommendations for detailing or best practice wall assemblies. And we're looking at not only the wall assembly itself, but the detailing, how it interfaces with the roof, how it interfaces with the door, how it interfaces at a balcony, or how, dissimilar materials like brick and siding or stone and stucco, how those interface and how to tie them together in a weather-tight manner.
Yeah, and Reece, you guys are also involved on the front end, obviously, because you're doing the structural design.
Yep.
So talk about, after you guys do your structural design, or kind of during your structural design, I guess, how are you guys coordinating with the builder and the architect to make sure that, the design intent's understood, that there's no conflicts between architectural and structural, and maybe even things like truss design? Like how much coordination is involved before the project ever starts? And then how do you make sure that is implemented in the field?
Great question. Every one of our contracts does have inspection services involved, embodied into our proposals, and we try to get in as early as we can, to sort of look at the pre-pour, pairs, everything from the very starting point. For our clients, builders, repeat people that have worked with us before, they know the process. For new clients, we're trying to be a bit more proactive and these are the drawings. Here's the process that you can expect to see going forward. These are the services that we provide. If you're in a TDI windstorm area, it's super important to get us involved right at the upfront end of construction, because we need to be submitting the necessary paperwork to the TDI website, and then we need to be making sure that we're monitoring every single step of the way, because the burden of the proof is effectively put on the engineer to do that. Here in Houston, it's not as important, but there's a lot of times where things will get built and then the city red tags them. You need an engineer letter, and it's already done. And so we're sort of left, well, I can't sign and seal something that we didn't have any representation to verify that happened. And that puts everyone in an awkward situation. So trying to be proactive to get up front early is super important to us. And for new homeowners, when our client is the homeowner, we really try make that work. And there's always room for improvement. So we're always trying to improve our services and our processes to make sure that that's well communicated to them. Because we've had many times where concrete's out on site and the question's asked, and then we're scrambling to try to get an inspector out there that day, like looking at drill pairs and all sorts of chaos. There's never a dull day in the office when it comes to inspections. There's always something new going on.
Which inspections do you recommend people do? Like, so you mentioned
Can I say all of them?
Up-here inspections.
All of them, yes.
All of them.
I agree.
How many, I guess for each of you, how many inspections are there do you recommend on a typical custom home build project?
Obviously, it's going to be vary based on the project size, right? We normally do about 4 to 6 job site visits per project, sometimes more, especially if there's corrective actions. We're going to call for a reinspection so that we can come back out and document that the corrective actions have been made. And so, just to your point about documentation, and it's so hard to then sign off on something after it's already occurred. That's all the more reason to have the inspection, because now you have documentation that, of how the structure was built, so that if there is a problem later on, you have photographic evidence or other documentation to go back to, and you're not having to necessarily disassemble a property in order to figure out whether it was done right or not to begin with.
Yeah. Reece?
So I'll start with the minimum. Minimally, if you're in the city of Houston, they require, if you're doing a slab on grade post-tension, they typically would need an engineer letter special inspection for the elongation of the tendons to be done. Sometimes the pre-pour can be taken care by the city, and they don't require that. They used to, but some. I'll also say that some projects some people manage to get by without inspectors, and then some people just have a short straw or something like that, and they get flagged by the city that, hey, you need this letter. And so minimally, you need the elongations, and the city also won't sign off on anything regarding CMU. So your concrete masonry units or steel. If there's steel on the project, and I'm talking about structural steel, red iron, they typically will need a weld and bolt letter as well. So those are the 3 minimum inspections that you usually need to have a third-party engineer with a letter that is signed and sealed by a registered Texas PE to show that the elongations are in accordance with the plans and stressed accordingly based on how we measure the elongation of the tendons. CMU is the one that's we get done or asked to do after the fact, because the city just after Harvey made it more of a requirement. It never used to be that, and then they sort of started mandating it, and so we had all these walls that were grouted, and they're like, "Hey, can you write me a CMU letter?" I was like, "Sure." I'm looking at a wall, I don't know what's in it, and it happened, more than I'd like to care to admit.
Just to clarify that for people who are listening that don't know what that means. So when you build a CMU wall, commonly known as like a cinder block wall, we see a lot of those for elevated houses on a crawl space here in Houston. Other parts of the country who are listening may have a basement built from a CMU perimeter wall or stem wall. But those CMUs, those blocks have to be filled and then typically there's some rebar inserted into the blocks and then filled that kind of holds them together and keeps them from shifting. Is that right?
Yes, sir. Correct. And then the steel, as I mentioned, is the other letter that the city of Houston typically requires. If you're building in West U, they require that the engineer does the pre-pour, pour monitor. So that means that there is a engineering representative on site throughout any time concrete is getting placed, watching the trucks, not necessarily doing the testing, but watching the trucks, making sure that the placement is done correctly, and then any elongations or anything regarding the foundation. And then the engineer has to sign off on a foundation certification. And they also require framing as a minimum too. That includes as a minimum the framing inspection, checking all the beams, the walls, the layouts, roofing, rafters, joists, everything on the plans pretty much.
Yeah.
And then a sheathing or nail pattern inspection, which is looking at the nail pattern of the sheathing that goes around the house and for any interior shear walls that are added. And they also require a clip and strap inspection to be done. That's all the clips and straps that are used to connect the rafters to the walls, studs to the floor diaphragms, and then the bottom plates to the foundation.
So that city is actually requiring the things that probably should be inspected anyway.
Yes.
So they're helping you guys out by requiring those services, whereas a lot of builders or homeowners would just bypass that because they're like, I don't want to spend $300 on that or $500 on that, right?
Correct. So, yeah.
I mean, those are great points to have you guys out to the job site anyway, right? So
yeah.
The city requiring that is a good thing that protects their citizens within their city. Probably more cities should do that, honestly.
Yeah, and I think as everything sort of tends, and we do have more of a CYA system where things happen and more regulations are put in place. I mean, it's tending to be more and more, or trending more and more in that direction.
Yeah.
And so, to answer your question, to list a few extra inspections we do, if we were to do a full service, I mean, we start from right from the get-go on the ground. If you've got a home that has drilled piers, our inspectors out there with a tape measure, dropping the tape measure, making sure that the piers are drilled to depth. Having a representative from the geotechnical engineering firm and the structural engineering firm is highly recommended when you're drilling piers, because quite often you might run into complications on the drilling. You'll hit water, your bells start collapsing, and you need someone on there to be able to make a very, very quick executive decision to help the process keep moving. Otherwise, you got concrete sitting there, big delays that can happen. So
I think no builder wants more inspections. So this probably sounds weird coming from a guy who also builds homes. But I think, man, there's several phases which I think we need more inspections. Whether it's the city inspector or there's more situations where I think the city needs to require a third party inspection, and that's just purely from the protecting the homeowner, the consumer standpoint, and the longevity of the home.
And if I can add, we were talking about the city inspectors before, and I think it's always important to have a respect for every professional and the process of a home build.
Definitely.
And on the city inspectors, they've got a really hard job. I mean, they're looking at, they can have a day where they've got a lot of inspections, and they're walking into houses with 5 different sets of engineering plans, 5 sets of different architectural plans. They don't have time to look at every single note, detail, general specification, typical details, typical notes. And so tying back to the third party inspection, our guys are trained specifically on our drawings, on our process, on how we do things. And they can catch a lot more just due to that advantage that a city inspector may be able to catch. They're more going off of their experience, what they can see and what they do, and just doing the best that they can do to do that. And so I think there's a lot of advantage in paying, a very small amount of money for relative to the cost of your potential dream home, or whatever it is you're building. It's a big investment to make sure that you get it done right the first time, and you're not paying tenfold, maybe even 100-fold for the cost of that inspection and issues further on down the line if something's missed.
Yeah, again, you're asking a guy or a gal who, if they're a city inspector, who may have 20 or 30 houses they're inspecting a day. If they're working an 8-hour day, they have to do, 3 to 5 houses every single hour. And they try to group those things in geographical location, but they're driving around, they're having to get access to the job site, and I mean it's a tough job, and you're asking them to, in let's say a 10 or 15 minute max stop on a job site, to catch what really is an hour or two worth of walk around in 5 or 10 minutes.
Most of our framing inspections are minimally an hour long for a good sized custom home. We've had 40,000 square foot homes that have taken 2 days to inspect with 2 people.
Yeah.
And we get multiple pages, just multiple red lines, and as a city inspector, you can't put that assurance or level of insurance on a city inspector to be like, yeah, no, they signed off on my framing, I'm good. It's just that's not fair to them, and it's also not fair to the homeowner as well.
And again, a lot of the builders just have this get it done, get me to the next step mentality. I know my guys did this right. And we see all the time people that just they trust their subcontractors too much. They're like, oh, I've been using this guy. He's been framing for me for 20 years. He knows what he's doing. Or this guy's been doing stucco for me for 20 years. I trust that guy, right? And man, those are the ones that we often see the most screw ups on, where maybe the builder just doesn't have that level of knowledge because he's just always trusted his subcontractor and he's never learned how it should be done because that guy knows how to do it, right?
Well, and I think that may be a sign of a quality builder when a homeowner is looking for a builder, right? Is that builder willing to bring in third parties to verify their trade's work and to ensure that that builder is doing the best job he possibly can for somebody who's purchasing or building a home?
Right. We suggest that we're like, hey, here's our engineer, Rhondalyn, Toner, all these partners that we have. Here are the services they offer. Here's the inspections they do. We recommend that you do all these, not because we're bad, because we're human and we miss things, and our subs are human and they miss things. And even a good builder, a good project manager, you walk around and see the same thing every day, and you kind of become blind to certain things. It's just human nature, right?
I think a good builder willing to do that, promote that level of transparency, and hey, look, I want other people looking at my work. I think that speaks volumes to the quality of work that they're willing to put their name to. If you got a builder that's like, I don't want to do that, I mean, it's a lot easier to hide things, particularly if you're a new homeowner, you've got no idea, like, Brian and Heather in season 1. I mean, there's a lot of things you just don't know what you don't know until it's too late.
Yeah.
And so as a builder wanting to do that, I for me, my professional experience, the good builders are ones that like, I want all these services and I want that to be my standard. I mean, that speaks volumes to us because we're looking for quality partners to partner with, and I love it when we have a builder that wants that professional agreement that as a minimum basis we are going to do all these things. I don't care if the city needs it. I want this to be done so that I can tell my homeowners that they've got a quality product.
I like to put it in perspective with kind of the cost of the house too. We're talking here mostly about custom homes, which I would put in the just kind of the general range in our market of $800,000 to several million. So we're not talking about a cheap home, right? So in perspective with the cost of the home, the cost to do these inspections is a very small fraction of the overall budget. And yeah, I get it. I mean, $1,000 here is still a lot of money. But when you think about, what you're investing your money in and protecting yourself, it's a real small cost. So I just wanted to ask you real quick, what are some typical costs that people can expect? And again, this is the Houston market in 2023 on a home of indeterminate size for this conversation. But let's just say it's a 4,000 square foot custom home with a mix of stucco and brick or something like that, just to kind of paint a picture of what we're inspecting. What kind of cost should people expect from each of you guys for your services for a project?
So I would say that we're relatively inexpensive in comparison to some. A person can expect $1,200 to $3,000 depending on the size of the project and how involved we are, whether they get us involved on the front end and then do all the inspections in between and then final out with us. Yeah, 1,200 to 3,000.
Okay.
For us, from the inspection side, our typical custom rate is $270. $275 for a inspector, a BEC inspector, to go out on site, do the observation for an hour and a half, and then those photos, that report, the photos are then reviewed by the engineer of record, and a letter is provided that says this has been reviewed. These are the list of deficiencies, if applicable, or clean letter, and then an engineered seal.
So $275 per. So on a project, if you're doing 4 or 5 inspections total on a project, maybe.
So we
right?
We will typically try to do it per site visit. So if you're able to do multiples, if you're doing like framing, clip and strap, or the same thing, we'll roll those into one. Double charge for the same site visit.
Right.
So we look at it typically more from per site visit as how we sort of word it.
Gotcha. Multiple
observations, and then if there's overtime, if that inspection ends up blowing out to 3 hours, we document that, explain why, and then it's charged for that time. Or if there's trip fees, other things, those are other expenses that typically get built into what we do. If we for our professional service agreements, our clients that we work with a lot, sometimes we'll come down on those prices, and for the repeatability, and just to get those out there.
So people might spend another $1,000, $1,500 over the life of a project, right? So, combined, if you hire both of these companies, you might spend $3,000 or so on your project. We were supposed to have one other person on the podcast with us today, Ryan Atlee with Toner Home Matters. Toner's been on here 3 times, I think, already. But Ryan is a guy who does field inspections for Toner. He was going to be with us too. Their inspections are included in their overall project cost that they charge. So unless you're asking them to do extra things outside of their scope that you've already paid for, there's no extra cost. So, when you hire them for building performance design, they include, I think 3 or 4 inspections during the process. And so again, in your overall project budget, if you're talking 800, 1 million, 2 million, 3 million, an extra $3,000 or $4,000 is a very small line item on your budget to give you peace of mind, right?
Agreed.
Absolutely.
What are some typical things that you, or I guess some repeat things that you see that are problems that get missed by builders, subcontractors? What are some typical things that you catch in the field?
Well, so we typically do a minimum of 3 inspections. Our first inspection is what we call the weather barrier substrate flashing inspection. And so it's not substrate like Reece has described, but rather, what is the exterior cladding going over? That is our substrate. So the typical things I see there is just rips, cuts, tears, improper interfaces with related balcony flashings, roof flashings, window flashings, door flashings. If you're doing a sheet material synthetic weather barrier, right, and it's got cuts and tears, and that is the place where water is supposed to go, if it gets behind the cladding, that can become problematic. And then, our next inspection is a lath inspection on a house that is a stucco house. And I can say that we do just inspect that to a higher level of performance than you would get from the city. So proper attachment of the lath, proper fastening and installation of accessories. And then the final is, people have this idea that caulking is ugly. It doesn't have to be ugly. And I think that if more people actually saw it, noticed it, and knew what it did, they would maintain it. Every 1 to 3 years. So we're looking on the back end to see everything is sealed up. And, a lot of times caulking falls by the wayside, especially on houses that are brick veneer or stone veneer, because for some reason people think that mortar is water resistant, and it's not.
And caulking is something that has a lifespan. It's not a lifetime product. It requires replacement maintenance, right? So, in fact, that's one of the things that we had a guy on a few weeks ago, Eric Klein with Goodsmith Home Maintenance and Repair, and we talked about how that's one of the things that people just homeowners never check. So once they're in the house, they're living there. Also speaking for myself here, how often do I go out and walk around my house and look at the caulking in my house? And I know better, you know? So, and you guys get hired also a lot on the resale side, right? So if
Yes.
somebody's buying a house, you guys will get brought in to look at, the stucco, the masonry, and do a pre-purchase inspection too, right?
That's correct. And probably the most instances of deficiencies in that pre-sale inspection is, again, sealant and keeping the dirt down off of the house, and maintaining where your sprinkler heads spray, right? If we're watering the house 3 times a week instead of the turf or the raised beds, it's not going to grow more house.
It's also going to cause foundation. Houston is notorious for that, and overwatering trees and swimming pools are three biggest reasons for foundation movement. So I definitely agree with that. You'll have people like, yeah, I water my house and I'm good. I'll set 10 minutes for every zone. Well, you got to stage the watering per the zones. If you've got a zone down the side of the house that's pea gravel and drainage, it doesn't need watering for 10 minutes like the front yard or the backyard might. So you've really got to, don't just do a blanket time allocation. You've got to really tailor it to each zone that you're doing. And that's a huge reason for why we get called out on the consulting side to look at foundation movement, foundation issues. And as you said, exactly, I mean, that was what happened with your season 1 thing, the drainage and the swales. That's the biggest reason for foundation, just overwatering, blocked drainage, blocked weep holes. People throw plants all the way up against the house and block the weep holes. And guess what? If water can't go up the weep holes, or painting the weep holes, that's another big one we see. And you probably see that all the time.
And painting them, yes.
So
a lot of that is a lack of homeowner education too. The builder doesn't tell the homeowner, when the person moves into their home, the builder doesn't take the time a lot of times to explain what these different systems of the house do and why they're important and why you shouldn't put a flower bed against your house. They don't explain what that swale is that's made to take the water away from the house. And so like in my story example, Brian and Heather didn't like the way the swale looked in their side yard because their dog kept getting muddy. So they're like, we'll just add some dirt there and build it up and no more swale and my dog's cleaner. But guess what? Now the water's coming back toward the house.
And I can send you a link to the FPA published a paper on homeowner maintenance that FPA being the Foundation Performance Association of Houston. It's a document that just goes through homeowner responsibilities and maintenance and things to sort of upkeep that. So
if you'll send that to me, I'll be sure and put it on the notes on the podcast for people to read that too.
Sure.
Can I just add too that this homeowner maintenance that we're talking about is a good reason for us to be retained as a third party inspector about 11 months after the closing of a home. And then regular maintenance inspections, right? Ongoing, because you just said yourself, even you don't walk around a house with a critical eye looking at 4 things that need to be maintained, right?
Yep.
So even after someone closes on a house, maintenance inspections are not a bad idea.
I think a lot of that goes back to, and I've touched on this before with other guests, that I think people are just less involved with their homes now in general than they used to be. You think about like my grandparents, my grandpa was always out working on his house or walking around doing things around the outside of the house. And whether it's busyness or just a lack of knowledge, people just don't spend as much time tinkering on their house now in general. At least, especially in Houston, for many months of the year, we are more indoor creatures. And so, and I think this really comes into play a lot on the sides of a house in a city like Houston, where you've got 5-foot setbacks. There's nothing interesting to see on the sides of your house, and you don't have that much reason to walk around and just stare at the side of your house. In fact, there's one side of my house that I never walk down unless there's a problem. So yeah, I think that plays into the kind of the lack of maintenance. But going back to kind of things that are typical failures. So I guess let's talk about what are typical failures that you see and how can those things be prevented? So on the engineering side, do you have any examples of something that if it's not done right, and this is something that happens a lot, it's going to cause long-term failure or long-term problems?
How long do we have?
As long as you want.
It's a great question. And I asked Paul Zimmerman that question. He's our senior inspector and project manager for all of the inspections. Pretty much oversees everything before it comes to either me or any of our other engineers. And, I thought he had a really good response. And that was that, the list of deficiencies really comes down to the project manager running it. If that project manager, the PM of the job, really has the time to actually look through the punch list, really walk the punch list. I mean, you did a whole episode on punch lists and the importance of doing that. That list for us of incorrections and issues goes down immensely. You can tell the people that really know how to sort of work that out versus like, I'm just going to trust someone else to do it. And, that happens a lot where we'll do an inspection. We have a list of 20 deficiencies that get out. We get called, hey, the deficiencies are done, handled. We get out there, nothing's done, nothing's changed. And my guy told me he did that. And,
you too?
So, to speak specifically to some of the, I just wanted to mention that because that's a very important factor. And I think really having engaged PMs that can really walk the jobs and do that is key to making sure that is minimized. To speak specifically to issues, I mean, I could go on for a long time, but when it comes to foundations, a very typical thing is dirt in the grade beams. If you've got a post-tension foundation, you've got a nice clean makeup, and this happens a lot. You've got a nice clean makeup, the form boards are set, everything's done, and then you've got, we do the inspection, it's great. Guy comes along and does some final grading to sort of fill in the gaps and just pushes dirt against that, and all the dirt falls through the gap and is sitting nice and around our cables. Well, that's great. Concrete can't go around the cable if there's dirt there. And, with our inspectors have been there sort of digging dirt. I've even been on job sites where I'm digging dirt out and like concrete's getting poured. And we're like, guys, like get this thing out of here. Like what's going on? So that's just a general thing. It sounds funny, but it's a serious issue that we have. A lot of reports are just clean debris from the grade beams, clean dirt, making sure that you've got a nice solid system for the concrete to be poured and engage the structural components that are necessary to make that foundation work. A lot of times rebars missed and little details. We'll have a lot of little extra details for drops, things where just nosing bars, elevator drops, beams that need to go around elevator drops. Sometimes they just get completely missed, or beams in general. We're all human. Sometimes we miss it. Sometimes we'll have very specific details on how we need to drop, or a great one is if you're in a floodplain, you have to mitigate for the flood control. That means that it's sort of like a bathtub. You've got water in a bathtub, and there's an initial level. For every element that you put into the bath that raises that water level, the job of mitigation is to make sure that you remove as much as you're putting out, so that that water level doesn't increase as a net volume of fill. And so what happens is we'll design drops and drop slabs and everywhere as a unique way to get around having the homeowner to spend a lot of money digging a pond. We'll drop the foundations in the middle if we've got a slab on grade with post-tension pony walls, and so we'll specifically drop that foundation so that it's out of the floodplain. Mitigation is controlled. Well, the guy comes back and says, I don't want to do that. I'm just going to pour it to however I usually do and just put a 12-inch form board, a 2x12 form board, and form this thing up. Well, now they've poured a lot of concrete in that floodplain. And then if it gets caught, then we're having to dig holes somewhere else. So even details like that, those are things that you'll never ever get coverage from a city inspection because they're not looking at the civil plans. They don't know that that's required. And so that's a common thing that we see on the structural side, on the foundation. And framing, a lot of changes. A big thing that we see, red lines, changes that are made in field that are not re-coordinated back through the engineering team, walls that are moved, or things that are substituted out. People don't like putting in engineered beams, and had a lot of builders who are like, hey, you've got this 5.5 by 18-inch beam. Can I sub it out with 2x12s? Like, no, if it could, we would have done that. There's a reason why we're doing that. It comes down to performance design. Performance design is making sure that the building doesn't perform just to the code minimum, but it's also making sure it's performed to the intendance of its use. And so if you've got a very modern home, big, long spans, 30-foot long beam, code minimum says that beam can probably deflect about 1 inch if you're going to go by the code minimum, and that's not what we designed to.
Yeah.
So 1 inch isn't acceptable to any homeowner.
Yeah, the homeowner doesn't want their beam sagging 1 inch on their beautiful modern home.
Yeah, level 5 finish, and they're going to say, yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
Well, and two, during the structural inspection, you have trades that are making penetrations through structural elements, right?
Yeah, all the time. Yep.
So if you have designed something that should not have a hole in it, and the mechanical contractor thinks that's a good place to run their duct work, right? That could be a problem.
Yep. And so, beams are a big issue that we commonly see. Just either substitutions, which some are allowed, some are not. They're just wrong beams for the wrong places. Penetrations, plumbers and electricians that will come through and just drill wherever they want. A good plumber is going to ask the question, where can I drill this hole? I need to route this through. You need to provide the access. Bad plumber's just going to be like, yeah, sure. I mean, honestly, I've seen some awful things, and I liken it to standing on a branch and sort of cutting the branch, and you're standing on the outside because.
Yeah.
I mean, I've seen notches out of entire.
Yeah, it's like a Bugs Bunny
beams.
cartoon.
I mean, exactly that, and just you got this big beam, and they just notched a 12-inch chunk out of the beam, and thought that was going to be okay, and they're wondering why everything's deflecting. It's like, well, here it is.
Yeah, and for consumers listening, every engineered beam has a certain place within the beam that you can drill holes, and there's a certain number and diameter of holes, and kind of where in the overall length of the beam can you drill the holes, and if that's not followed, it's going to weaken that beam. And
and to that point, a very common issue that we see is that joists, a 2x12 or conventional lumber, is handled differently to engineered wood beams, which is also handled very differently to TGIs or I-joists. They're the engineered beams that look like a little I-beam. If you look at the cross section, there's like a 2x member at the top, and then there's plywood in the vertical web. Those have completely flip-flop of where you can put the holes versus what a 2x12 has.
Right.
Because of the way that they're engineered. And so a lot of people just think, this is how I've always done it, so I'm just going to go drill these holes right through this. Yeah, it's like, well, you can't do that with TGIs, and you have to follow these guidelines. And so just having that education and understanding, very expensive when that gets done. And a 5-minute question could have saved a very expensive retrofit of trying to fix and repair some things like that.
And I'll say that this is one of those things that if there's a high level of coordination during design, a lot of the stuff can get headed off early, because if the builder, the HVAC contractor, the engineer are talking about where things are going to be run, that can get mitigated during design process, because hey, we're going to run our ducts here, we're going to run our plumbing here, and let's use a truss. Let's use trusses instead of I-beams. Let's make sure that we have a path for our ductwork, and then we're not drilling holes in structural members.
We had that project just a few months ago. We had that coordination meeting up front, and you were pointing out, hey, I've got access that needs to go through this way. All right, great. We'll just, that beam's in the way. Let's rethink about this. Let's turn the trusses so that they get installed correctly, and you can actually get those where they needed to go, without trying to put steel plates or drill holes or, switch out steel beams or something like that on the fly in the middle of construction.
Yeah.
And that's just so integral to stopping, being patient, making sure that's coordinated in the design phase can save a whirlwind of issues at the tail end.
I also wanted to say that all of these things are designed to work together as systems, right? And especially on the exterior stuff, that stucco, the masonry, whatever it is, all those products are a system. They're designed to be installed a certain way. Certain materials are compatible with each other too. And so, I think people make a lot of substitutions. They're like, oh, well, that product's too expensive. I'm gonna substitute this, whether it's a beam or whether on the WRB, we're going to use these products that aren't compatible because it's cheap to do it that way. So I think one of the things that you look for, Rhondalyn, during inspections is making sure that system of that wall assembly is intact too, right?
That's right. So, specific brands are made and manufactured with a number of components and tested that the components by this particular manufacturer all work together in harmony to make sure that house is watertight, airtight, whatever the case is. And for example, I've had projects where we had one brand of weather-resistant barrier, but the flashing around the windows was a separate and different brand. The problem becomes is a lot of then finger pointing when there is a failure. Who's responsible? And if everyone is responsible, generally that means no one is responsible, right? there's transfer of warranty, there's transfer of responsibility when you're using brand X tape on brand Y weather barrier and brand, Y weather barrier in relation to something else. Yeah, I'm a proponent of single system sourcing for all the materials that make up the exterior building envelope, so that it minimizes the finger pointing, it minimizes the potential for failure because those products weren't tested and approved to work with one another.
A great example is, in fact, I had this conversation with Miguel from Tamlin back at the Builder Show in January. We talked about this, and Tamlin, all the manufacturers, they're going to test their product with their own products. I mean, they will sometimes bring in other products to test for compatibility, but when they're in their testing facility, they're using their WRB, their tape, their flashing products, and in fact, they'll give a different warranty if you use the whole system. So if you just use one component, it might be a 5-year warranty. If you use all their components, you might get a 10, 15, 20-year warranty, whatever that is. So you don't want to wait until you have a failure or a lawsuit or whatever, and then you find out later that those products voided each other out and now there's no warranty.
That's exactly right. Yeah. They are tested together, and like you said, as someone who has served as an expert witness in construction defect litigation where people have had leaks on from the exterior of their house, right? If you have one brand X tape around a window but brand Y weather barrier, X is going to say, well, we weren't manufactured to stick to brand Y. And of course you have a failure, and now it really falls back on the builder. And if the builder doesn't have the insurance, or if the builder's not there anymore, then it falls back on the homeowner.
On that topic, have you ever seen people will try to put stucco on thermoply?
Absolutely.
So that's that. In terms of substitutions, that's a huge one we've had because the cost of plywood went up astronomically 2 years ago, and that's gone up and down and fluctuated. But a lot of people were switching plywood to thermoply, and plywood, everyone knows what plywood is, RSB. Thermoply is a much thinner version that is used as a structural sheathing, and people just think I can switch those out. There's letters, then people have said that they're equivalent. But when it comes to stucco, no, you can't attach stucco to glorified cardboard.
Right.
Sorry.
So that product properly installed is a weather resistant barrier, and it really does change how you attach the lath to the house, because you're right. It may be structural from a racking perspective, but certainly it's not capable of holding a weight of 13 to 16 pounds per square foot of stucco. So, yeah.
Perfect example of when someone might switch something out for budget without following the process and that channel of thought all the way down to the nth degree, and it can cause issues down the line.
Yeah, I know there's plenty of some builders, engineers that might argue that thermoply is an acceptable substitution. I would never use it. I would never recommend that people use it. Again, it's a waxy cardboard essentially that you're wrapping your house with. In fact, we posted a video on our Instagram this week, or 2 videos of a several $1 million house just down the street here in Bel Air, where the builder did thermoply sheathing, and it wasn't even installed right. There's gaps and tears and reverse laps on it. It's just it's a loss. The whole house is a lawsuit waiting to happen.
It's a case of where, and not to knock the product. I mean, I think everything has an application, everything has a place. It is not a direct substitution of RSB, despite what some people will argue. I mean, I've heard arguments saying it's equivalent to RSB or plywood. It's not. It can be used, but it needs to have a place. It needs to be rerun through the engineer. You can't use it on 3-story homes. You can't use it on areas where you're relying on that plywood to do that. Now, in many instances, sure, we can make it work, and we've had to make it work on many of our projects and make those substitutions. Just yesterday, I got asked to switch back from thermoply to plywood because thermoply is now more expensive than plywood. I'm like, great.
Wow.
So,
well, this is all an argument for having our inspection on the front end of the weather barrier substrate flashing inspection, because those things get improperly installed all the time.
Yeah. Last question that I have is, do these inspections ever get confrontational? again, some builders, want you guys there. We make it part of our process. We suggest that you do these inspections. I imagine that sometimes you guys are brought in and the builder doesn't want you there, or the subcontractors don't want you there doing that inspection. Do these situations ever get confrontational?
Well, so I've been doing this for 26 years, and I can say I can probably count on two hands and have some fingers left over the number of times that it's become heated or confrontational. My approach in the inspections, and my team is trained that our job is really we're there to help and to educate, right? And there's some people that just don't want to hear it because they feel like they know better. And I've been doing it for 20 years and and it's worked for 20 years, and that may be fine. But obviously, systems and ways of doing things evolve, and they certainly have evolved over my career. It's really going to be on the client, if the client is the homeowner, to make sure that we're there and seen as advocates, not only for the homeowner but for the builder. What I would say is, if we're not brought in by the builder, which most of the time we are, it's really important for me, for the builder and the trades, to understand that we're there to help. We're there as a team member. We're not there, as many inspectors are perceived to be, to just bust people's chops because we think that's fun. We really want to see that the project is successful and can perform.
One of the things that Carl has implemented in our business is, or as a joke, is, or not as a joke, we take it very seriously, but it's rule number one in business is the client's always right. Rule number two, if the client's wrong, refer to rule number one. And so we take that seriously. I mean, we do anywhere from one or two inspections a day to up to 40 or 50 on the really high side, averaging around about 20 inspections a day, all across the greater Houston. And, population of Houston is bigger than my home country. So it's a big area to cover. And when you're dealing with that, yeah, we do have some confrontational situations that come up, either due to poor communication, as you've sort of stressed as one of the foundations walls of your diagram. Communication of when people are going to be on site, when the inspector needs to get there, or issues, or hey, I've sent you this, and again, it just comes down to communication. So every time I get those calls, I take it with we always have trained my team to make sure that they're acting very professional, and the light of, we'll get back to you. We're going to make sure that we do what it takes to make sure that you've got the product that you need. And it's always important to always get three sides to the story. There's always three sides to a story, and just trying to navigate and make sure that we can get, strip personal conflicts aside or that, but get to the key point. Like, what does this home need to make sure that they've got the product that's needed? Yeah, like I said, I could be here for days going on different examples, but most of our clients and builders are great, and it's as you said, I'm probably on hands and toes that I can count where we've had situations like that arise for various reasons, and we just make sure that if it is a mistake on our end, coordinating or scheduling, whatever it is, we do whatever it takes to make sure that we get that back on track and keep going forward.
I think when people, when builders, contractors realize that your services are going to protect them also, it's not just protecting the homeowner. I mean, that's the ultimate goal is the project, but you're also protecting the builder and the subcontractor, because if you can catch their problems, you're saving them a ton of potential warranty issues and legal issues down the road if we get these things up front, right?
Agreed. And we really try to work with them and be like, I know I've been told some other examples where it's like my way or the highway from an engineering side. And we really try to make sure, okay, this was on the plans, this is what you installed. Let's figure out a way that we can get this back to where it needs to be in order to try and make a change on the fly, to make sure that the original design intent is not compromised, but you're still not having to pay $10,000 to rip this out and start again. And that's commonly what we deal with on the daily sometimes. So,
well, guys, thank you both so much for being with me today. It's a great place to wrap up. We're out of time, so thank you so much for being here. We will definitely link both of your websites, your contact information in our show notes, so people can contact you. But Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having
Look
me.
forward to having you back again in the future.
Thank you for having us.
All right. And thank you guys for joining us again on the Your Project Shepherd podcast. We hope to see you again next time as we come close to wrapping up season 2. We'll talk to you later.